Julie Andrews, the luminous presence whose voice once seemed to descend rather than emerge, did more than enchant an audience. She reshaped how grace itself was understood, how elegance could carry strength, and how resilience could sound like music. Across decades that stretched from wartime childhood to global reverence, she did not simply perform. She became a measure of calm in a restless world, a reminder that refinement and courage could exist within the same breath. Her rise, so often described as miraculous, carried with it an unspoken cost. Because a gift that powerful is never untouched by the life that carries it. And behind the immaculate smile, behind the soprano once believed indestructible, something fragile began to strain, threatening the very instrument that had lifted her beyond fear. What happens when the voice that steadied the world becomes the one thing you can no longer rely on? At 90, Julie Andrews does not stand as a relic of memory, but as living proof that brilliance can survive change. That transformation does not erase light, it reshapes it. Before the world ever crowned her an icon, she was simply a child learning how to stay upright in an unsteady life. To honor Julie Andrews is to recognize not only what she gave the world, but what she endured to remain herself. She did not enter life bathed in certainty. Born Julia Elizabeth Wells on March 1st, 1935, in Walton-on-Thames, England, she arrived into a world already trembling. For years, she believed the man who tucked her in at night, Edward Charles Wells, was her father. A school teacher, steady and kind, he represented something invaluable in her early life: stability. Then, without warning, truth arrived. In 1950, her mother revealed that Julie was born from an affair, that the man who had raised her was not her biological father. It was not a revelation that explained anything. It fractured everything. Identity, once assumed, suddenly felt conditional. Belonging became something to be guarded rather than trusted. That sense of vigilance sharpened as war reshaped the landscape around her. Her parents separated. She moved in with her mother and stepfather, Ted Andrews, a vaudeville performer who praised her extraordinary voice while carrying an instability that unsettled every room. London nights echoed with sirens. Days were shaped by scarcity, and inside the home, boundaries blurred in ways no child should ever be forced to recognize. Julie learned early how to listen for danger, how to lock doors not out of ritual but necessity. Fear became physical memory. Decades later, it would return as instinct, uninvited, reminding her how early the body learns what the mind tries to forget, yet something within her refused to collapse. Her voice, astonishing in clarity, cut through fear like light through a sealed window. It was not simply beautiful. It was precise, commanding, almost unnerving in its purity. When she sang, distance appeared. Control returned. Sound became shelter. Singing was not joy at first. It was refuge, a place where intrusion could not follow. The paradox of her childhood was cruel. The man who unsettled her safety also recognized her gift and pushed her toward performance. Freedom and fear grew side by side. Julie did not sing because the world was listening. She sang because it was the only place she could breathe. Training followed discipline. At the Con Rittman School and under the uncompromising guidance of Madame Lillian Stiles Allen, her voice hardened into a force of nature. Practice burned. Travel was cold and lonely, but precision became armor. At 12, she stunned audiences at the London Hippodrome. At 13, she stood before royalty at the London Palladium, the youngest soloist ever to do so. These were not tentative steps. They were declarations. A child shaped by fear had found her footing. The world applauded the prodigy. Few noticed the vigilance beneath the poise. Julie Andrews carried that resolve into adulthood. At 19, she crossed the Atlantic with no safety net. Only a soprano of startling purity and a will forged long before applause ever arrived. Broadway responded instantly. The boyfriend announced her presence. My fair lady crowned it. Night after night, she transformed herself before thousands, surrendering completely. Then came rejection. Hollywood chose Audrey Hepburn for the film adaptation. The loss landed sharply, yet it did not undo her. Disappointment was familiar terrain. Walt Disney waited. Mary Poppins arrived. The world shifted. An Academy Award followed. It was not vindication. It was alignment. What followed was a period of incandescent visibility. The sound of music etched her image into cultural memory. Behind the scenes, exhaustion and bruises accumulated quietly. Julie did not complain. She understood surrender as part of craft. She built stability deliberately, choosing restraint over excess, anchoring herself with Blake Edwards. Beneath the spotlight lived the child who once locked doors to feel safe. That memory did not weaken her. It fueled her dot at the height of her grace. A quiet fracture appeared, hoarseness, distortion. In 1997, surgery meant to resolve benign nodules damaged her vocal cords beyond repair. Silence followed, not in the room, but within. Additional surgeries failed. Specialists hesitated. The voice that had defined her life was gone. She mourned not a career, but a part of her body. Yet even then, she remained. Turning to words, to storytelling, to advocacy, her presence endured, altered but intact. Julie Andrews' life has never been a straight ascent. It has been a series of reckonings, met with restraint, clarity, and grace sharpened by truth. She remains not because sound returned, but because purpose did. Comment 90 or write Rip Julie Andrews to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk. Though the loss of her voice marked a visible turning point, the deeper currents of Julie Andrews' life had always flowed beneath the surface, shaped by love, attachment, and the quiet endurance required to remain gentle in a demanding world. Long before silence entered her career, absence had already taught her its lessons. Love arrived early for Julie, not as fantasy, but as steadiness. Her first great devotion was Tony Walton, a designer whose eye for beauty matched her own instinct for restraint. They met when she was only 13 during a Christmas pantomime in London. She stood on stage, a girl with pigtails and a voice that held the room. He sat watching, sketchbook in hand. Nothing declared itself that day. The moment simply stayed. Years unfolded slowly, through letters written carefully, train rides taken at odd hours, and the shared belief that art and affection could grow without urgency. When they married in 1959, it felt less like a beginning than a continuation. In 1962, their daughter Emma Catherine arrived, grounding Julie in a certainty she would later describe as the clearest she had ever known. For a brief season, life felt balanced. Creative victories were shared. Laughter moved easily through their home. There was a fragile belief that something precious had been secured, but momentum has a way of eroding stillness. As Julie's career accelerated international acclaim, relentless travel, global visibility, the rhythm that once bound them loosened. Tony's work required presence and patience. Julie's demanded departure. There was no betrayal, no rupture marked by anger, only absence. Time together thinned until it felt borrowed. Conversations shortened not from conflict, but exhaustion. By 1967, they separated quietly. What ended was not affection, but alignment. Julie later reflected that they loved each other deeply, yet drifted too far apart to remain whole. The separation left her with questions that offered no clean answers. She carried that grief privately, beneath gowns and standing ovations. A single mother, she turned inward, questioning whether ambition had asked love to survive a pace it was never meant to endure. Guilt lingered without accusation. Had she moved too quickly? Too far? There were no absolutions, only understanding earned slowly. She chose presence where fame once demanded absence, becoming fiercely attentive to Emma. When she spoke of Tony later, it was never with bitterness. Only gratitude, respect, and restraint. Then came Blake Edwards. Not as a romantic rescue, but as an interruption neither of them expected to survive. They met almost awkwardly, outside a therapist's office, both carrying the quiet wreckage of lives that had not unfolded as planned. What passed between them was not spectacle. It was relief. A stillness. Blake was brilliant, sharp, deeply funny, and inwardly fragile in ways applause could never reach. Julie, often mistaken for effortless composure, became something else entirely in private. She stayed. She studied. She absorbed weight so another life would not collapse. Their bond was not built on ease. It was built on endurance. For 41 years, they constructed a life sewn together with shared creation and mutual resolve. Their films became sanctuaries where art soft pain. Their home breathed with books, debate, laughter, and the rare safety of being known. In the mid-1970s, they adopted 2 daughters from Vietnam, Amy and Joanna, expanding their family at a time when such choices drew questions rather than praise. Julie stepped into motherhood with unsparing intensity, reshaping her world around her children with the same discipline she once reserved for the stage. Life did not slow its demands. In 2010, after years of failing health, Blake Edwards died from complications of pneumonia. There was no spectacle. Julie was there, holding his hand, speaking fragments of memory into the narrow space between breaths. When it ended, the absence did not crash through her life. It hollowed it out. The silence was different from the one she had known after losing her voice. That loss had taken sound. This one took recognition, the comfort of being understood without words. Afterward, Julie returned to the world as expected, gracious, articulate, luminous. Yet something irreversible had shifted. Her laughter softened. Pauses lengthened. Grief did not announce itself dramatically. It settled into posture, into restraint, into the careful way she moved through the world. She rarely spoke the word lonely, yet it lingered in the breaths she took before answering certain questions. Love, for her, was no longer a fairy tale. It was endurance. The choice to remain through illness, through despair, through the fading of shared laughter. As she entered her later years, Julie Andrews did not retreat. She refined. Wealth was never her measure of success, though her life reflected restraint and foresight. Homes were sanctuaries, not symbols. Spaces designed to hold silence as gently as sound. Her days became structured around care, rest, hydration, gentle movement, conservation of what remained precious. Aging was not something to conquer. It was something to inhabit honestly. Her relationships remained the center. Her bond with Emma and with Amy and Joanna stayed active and grounded. Through children's books co-authored with Emma, she continued storytelling in a form that honored her changed voice. Philanthropy followed quietly, supporting vocal health, arts education, literacy. Presence endured without performance. At 90, Julie Andrews stands not as an epilogue, but as a culmination. A life shaped not by how loudly it was celebrated, but by what it chose to preserve: health, family, dignity, and the right to remain oneself. Comment 90 or write "Rip Julie Andrews" to honor them. Time has a way of rearranging what once seemed permanent. And for Julie Andrews, the later chapters of her life became less about reclaiming what was lost and more about understanding what remained. When the world had first fallen in love with her, it was for the sound that seemed to float effortlessly from her, as if untouched by gravity or strain. Yet the years that followed the loss of that voice revealed something far more enduring. a steadiness that did not depend on applause, a presence that no longer needed to announce itself to be felt. In the quiet after Blake Edwards' passing, Julie learned to live inside a new kind of stillness. Not the sudden silence of shock, but the long, echoing absence that follows deep companionship. Days unfolded without the familiar rhythms of shared work and private shorthand. Conversations no longer carried the weight of someone who knew her thoughts before they were spoken. And yet she remained upright, not hardened, not withdrawn, but altered in a way that suggested grief had refined her rather than hollowed her completely. Those close to her observed that she moved more deliberately, as if each moment deserved acknowledgement before being spent. Invitations were considered carefully. Public appearances became rare, not from disinterest, but from discernment. She had learned, through loss layered upon loss, that energy was not infinite. What remained needed protection. In this stage of life, restraint was not limitation. It was wisdom earned. Julie Andrews continued to create, though creation no longer demanded a stage. She wrote, she narrated, she advised. She told stories not because the world expected it, but because storytelling had always been her way of making sense of what could not be undone. Her collaboration with Emma Walton Hamilton deepened, their children's books carrying gentle echoes of resilience, kindness, and the quiet courage to endure change. These stories were not escapes. They were translations of lived experience into forms that could be shared without pain. Her voice, though permanently altered, remained unmistakably hers. Lower, textured, fragile in places where it once soared, it carried something new. Gravity, presence. When she spoke, listeners leaned in, not for spectacle, but for sincerity. She protected that voice with near ceremonial care, structuring her days around rest and conservation. It was no longer an instrument to be pushed. It was something to be honored. Physically, Julie embraced aging without defiance. There was no war against time in her posture or expression. Her appearance reflected acceptance rather than denial. Simplicity guided her self-care. Nutrition, sleep, gentle movement. The body that had carried so much now deserved kindness. She understood that endurance was not about resistance, but about alignment with her homes reflected the same philosophy. Not monuments to success, but sanctuaries shaped by memory. Spaces where grandchildren could visit without ceremony. Where silence was allowed to exist without explanation. Books lined shelves not for display, but for use. Photographs rested casually, marking moments not as trophies, but as anchors. These environments were not curated for admiration. They were built for survival, comfort, and continuity. Wealth, often cited in numbers, was never her measure of worth. What mattered was security earned through foresight. Every significant decision she made with money was shaped by early instability and later loss. Excess held no appeal. Reliability did. Privacy became her most valuable asset, guarded with the same care she once gave her voice. After decades of observation, she understood the cost of exposure. What remained of her life was not for public consumption. It was for living. Julie Andrews' philanthropy followed the same quiet path. Vocal health research, arts education, literacy initiatives. Support offered without announcement. Impact mattered more than recognition. She understood intimately how fragile a gift could be, how easily it could be taken. Her advocacy was not abstract. It was personal. A way of ensuring others might be spared the shock she endured. As years passed, admiration for Julie shifted subtly. The world that once celebrated her perfection began to revere her honesty, her willingness to speak about loss without dramatizing it, to acknowledge grief without being consumed by it, to remain visible without performing. In doing so, she offered something rarer than nostalgia. She offered permission to change, to grieve, to continue without returning to what once defined you. When she appeared in interviews, there was often a pause before she answered certain questions. Not hesitation, but listening, as if she were checking inward before allowing words to emerge. That pause carried weight. It suggested a life lived with attention rather than urgency, a woman no longer racing toward the next role, the next expectation, but standing fully inside the moment she occupied. Julie Andrews' legacy is not confined to film reels or recordings. It lives in the discipline she modeled, in the restraint she practiced, in the grace that remained intact even when the sound that once carried it disappeared. Her story reminds us that identity is not a single gift, but a series of choices made when that gift is challenged. At 90, she continues forward not as an icon frozen in time, but as a human being who has allowed life to mark her without erasing her. That is the quiet power of her presence now. Not brilliance untouched by struggle, but light that has passed through it and remained. Comment 90 or write RIP Julie Andrews to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk. There is a particular stillness that settles around a life once lived at full volume, and Julie Andrews learned how to inhabit that stillness without fear. In earlier years, silence had arrived as something imposed, first by circumstance, later by loss. Now it became chosen, not as retreat, but as clarity. The noise of expectation no longer defined her days. What mattered was alignment, the quiet agreement between who she had been, who she was, and who she allowed herself to become. Julie's relationship with memory deepened in these later years. She did not dwell in the past, yet she did not flee from it either. The roles that once defined generations remained part of her, but no longer demanded repetition. Mary Poppins and Maria von Trapp existed now as chapters, not destinations. She spoke of them with affection, not attachment. They were expressions of a younger self, crafted with discipline and joy, but they did not confine her present. What surprised many was how fully she embraced this evolution. There was no bitterness toward the industry that once relied so heavily on her voice. No resentment toward a body that had changed beyond repair. Instead, there was curiosity. What else could a life hold once its most celebrated feature had gone silent? Julie answered that question not with reinvention, but with continuity. She remained herself, simply expressed through different forms. Writing became not just a vocation, but a way of translating experience. Through children's stories, she explored resilience without heaviness, courage without spectacle. These books carried warmth rather than instruction, offering comfort rather than lessons. They reflected her belief that strength did not need to announce itself to be real, that kindness, practiced consistently, could outlast applause. Her presence in the public eye grew increasingly intentional. When she appeared, it was with purpose, to support a cause, to lend experience, to encourage others navigating loss or transition. She spoke candidly about local injury, about identity shaken and reassembled. In doing so, she reframed success, no longer as preservation of peak moments, but as the ability to adapt without surrendering dignity. Those who encountered her privately described a woman attentive in conversation, quick to listen, slow to judge. There was humor still, dry and precise. Laughter arrived gently, no longer effortless, but sincere. She did not fill silence to avoid it. She allowed it to breathe. In that space, connection deepened. Family remained her anchor. Emma, Amy, and Joanna formed the center around which her days quietly turned. Grandchildren brought a different rhythm, one not shaped by performance or expectation. Julie moved within that rhythm with ease, present in ways her earlier life had not allowed. She attended not as an icon, but as a grandmother, a mother, a witness to growth unmeasured by cameras. As age advanced, so did reflection. Julie Andrews spoke of gratitude not as a grand declaration, but as a daily orientation. Gratitude for work that mattered, for love that endured, even when it changed form, for survival itself. She did not romanticize hardship, yet she acknowledged its role in shaping discernment. The fractures of her life did not vanish. They became part of the structure that held her steady. There is a temptation to view such lives through the lens of triumph alone, to smooth the edges, to preserve the image untouched by complexity. Julie's story resists that simplification. Her grace was not the absence of pain. It was the result of living with it honestly, of choosing steadiness when spectacle would have been easier, of remaining gentle in a world that often rewarded hardness. In conversations about legacy, she remained measured. Legacy, she believed, was not something declared. It was something observed over time, in the way people remembered how you made them feel, in the values that continued quietly after attention moved elsewhere. Her hope was not to be admired endlessly, but to have mattered meaningfully. As the years continued, Julie Andrews embodied a rare kind of visibility. Not constant, not demanding, but enduring. She existed without needing to assert herself. Her presence carried weight precisely because it was unforced. In a culture that often equates relevance with volume, she demonstrated another path. One where influence deepens as noise recedes. At 90, her life reads not as a closing chapter, but as a sustained note held gently at the end of a long composition. Not fading, not straining, simply resting where it belongs. A reminder that brilliance does not end when form changes. It adapts, it settles. It remains. Julie Andrews continues to stand as a testament to that truth. A life shaped by sound, silence, love, and loss, carried forward with restraint, clarity, and enduring grace. Comment 90 or write Rip Julie Andrews to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk, in the long arc of Julie Andrews' life, what emerges most clearly is not a single triumph or loss, but a sustained commitment to integrity. As the years accumulated, she did not attempt to preserve an earlier version of herself for comfort or recognition. Instead, she allowed each season to inform the next, accepting that continuity does not require sameness. This acceptance became the quiet strength beneath everything she did. By her 9th decade, Julie understood that admiration could be both a gift and a burden. She met it with courtesy, but no longer organized her life around it. Applause had once been the air she breathed. Now, she chose stillness as deliberately as she once chose discipline. Her days were shaped by intention rather than obligation. What she offered the world was no longer constant visibility, but considered presence. When she reflected on her career, she did so without nostalgia's distortion. She acknowledged the wonder of it, the improbable journey from wartime London to global stages, but she also spoke honestly about its costs. The physical toll, the emotional strain, the way momentum can outrun reflection if left unchecked. These were not confessions. They were observations offered calmly, without regret. Julie Andrews never framed her life as one of sacrifice. She framed it as one of choices made with the information available at the time. Some brought joy, some brought pain. All shaped her. This clarity allowed her to speak about her past without bitterness, her present without fear, and her future without expectation. Few lives reach that equilibrium. Her influence continued in subtle ways. In younger performers who cited her not just as inspiration, but as example. In artists who learned that discipline could coexist with warmth. In audiences who discovered that grace was not fragility, but strength expressed without aggression. Even as her voice changed, her standard remained intact. In private moments, those closest to her described a woman deeply attentive to small details. The way light shifted through a room, the cadence of conversation, the comfort of routine. These were not habits of someone retreating from life, but of someone fully inhabiting it. She found meaning not in scale, but in texture. Julie's relationship with silence evolved over time. Once feared, once imposed, now welcomed, silence no longer represented absence. It represented space, a place where memory could settle without intrusion, where gratitude could exist without performance, where grief could be acknowledged without being reawakened. She spoke often about kindness, not as an abstract virtue, but as a practice, something enacted daily, often unnoticed. Kindness in restraint, in listening, in choosing not to wound even when wounded. This philosophy guided her interactions long after fame no longer demanded them. As she aged, Julie Andrews resisted the urge to mythologize her own endurance. She did not claim exceptionalism. She credited survival to support, to opportunity, to work, and to timing. This humility was not performative. It was consistent with a life spent understanding how easily circumstances can change. In conversations about the future, she remained grounded. There was no insistence on permanence, no anxiety about relevance. She trusted that what mattered would endure on its own, that stories told honestly have a way of finding their place long after the teller steps back. Julie Andrews' life does not offer a lesson in perfection. It offers something more useful, a model of adaptation, of meeting loss without surrender, of allowing identity to expand rather than fracture when its most visible elements fall away. Her journey affirms that dignity is not granted by success, but sustained through character. Now, at 90, she stands quietly within the fullness of what she has lived, not untouched by sorrow, not defined by it. She remains present, reflective, and whole, a reminder that a life well lived is not measured by how loudly it is celebrated, but by how gently it continues. Julie Andrews endures not as an echo of what once was, but as proof that grace can survive transformation. That light does not vanish when it changes shape. It simply learns how to rest, calm at 90, or write Rip Julie Andrews to honor them. As the years continue to gather softly around Julie Andrews, her life no longer reads as a performance measured in acts, but as a sustained presence shaped by intention. What remains striking is not how much she accomplished, but how carefully she learned to stop when stopping became necessary. In a culture that often equates persistence with worth, she demonstrated another form of courage. The courage to listen to limitation without interpreting it as failure. Julie's relationship with the public has settled into something rare. There is affection without demand, admiration without intrusion. She is recognized not because she insists on being seen, but because the imprint of her work remains embedded in memory. Generations who never saw her first performances still recognize her cadence, her restraint, the unmistakable tone of someone who never needed excess to be felt. She has spoken of the importance of leaving space for the next generation, of stepping aside without resentment. This was not resignation. It was stewardship, a belief that legacy does not require constant reinforcement, that what is genuine will survive distance. Her trust in that principle reflects a deep confidence, not in fame, but in substance. In private, her days are quiet but not empty. Reading, writing, time with family, reflection. The rituals are simple yet deliberate, each one chosen to support balance rather than spectacle. She understands now that attention is finite, and where it is placed determines the shape of a life. What once went outward now turns inward, not as retreat, but as completion. Julie Andrews has often been described as timeless, yet she has never resisted time. She has moved with it, allowing it to alter her without erasing her. Wrinkles are not hidden. Changes are not denied. They are acknowledged as evidence of continuity. A body that has carried work, love, grief, and joy deserves respect, not correction. Her reflections on resilience are never abstract. They are grounded in experience, in moments when identity collapsed and had to be rebuilt, in periods when certainty vanished and only discipline remained. She does not romanticize these passages. She honors them by telling the truth about how difficult they were and how survival often looks ordinary from the outside.